This is the Spot Mayhem 509 in a 6-star build with the DPX2 shock upgrade and the Fox 36 front fork upgrade. The front fork is a little bit longer at 140 mil travel and 130 mil travel in the rear. The 509 designation, the 5.0 means 5.0 inches of travel in the rear, 130 mil, and the 9 means it's a 29er. This bike is incredible. The first time I found out about Spot was at Outer Bike, and it was by accident. I was looking for a particular bike to ride. They were all gone. I couldn't demo one, so I was just wandering around trying to find anything in my size. Well, I came to Spot's booth and I rode the Mayhem in the Plus configuration. And that bike blew me away. It was my favorite bike of Outer Bike, and it totally put Spot on my radar. And as I learned more about it, I remembered thinking, oh yeah, I remember hearing about that Living Link technology with the carbon leaf spring down here instead of another pivot. Anyway, the ride characteristics were exactly what I was looking for. I don't like bikes that sag. I don't like bikes that bob when you pedal on them. I don't like bikes that just gobble everything up and have no feel to them. I would rather a bike felt a little more on the hardtail side than on the downhill bike that just erases everything. And Spot's suspension nails that feeling. A lot of people come from different backgrounds and want different things in a bike. So what's perfect for me may not be what's perfect for you. If you come from a road bike perspective or cross-country race perspective, you're gonna ride this machine way different than someone who comes from a BMX or downhill perspective. And we're gonna want different things in the bike. I tend to come more from the BMX background, but I've been mountain biking for 20 years, and mountain bikes aren't new to me, but I do tend to ride it more like a BMX bike, jumping off things, wheeling, manualing, slashing corners, and just trying to goof around as much as possible. So the 6-star build comes totally blinged out. NVM 60 wheels, carbon wheels with the 30mm internal, really cool, laced up to DT hubs. It's got Schwalbe Knobby Nick 2.35 tires. We've got full SRAM XX1 Eagle, the best of the best. We've got the Bike Yoke Revive dropper, hands down my favorite dropper. And one cool thing is this dropper is available on every Spot, whether it's a 4-star, 5-star, or 6-star build. Love, love, love that dropper. We've got the upgraded Fox Factory DPX2, like I said, and that has an extra reservoir here so that the oil doesn't heat up as much. It's better performing over long repeated hits. So for like 3-hour descents, it's not gonna overheat and the shock won't fade as much. Probably not needed for most people, and maybe not even needed for me as well, but I do take advantage of the full 140 mil travel on the Fox 36 up front. It's got race face 35 mil carbon bars, SRAM Guide RSC brakes, the best of the best everything, and it rides like it. It's amazing. So these come in 3 builds. You've got the 4-star, which is probably what I would go with. It's just a lot of bang for the buck. Still has a great Bike Yoke Revive dropper. It's got SRAM GX Eagle, which frankly, if I'm blindfolded, I can't tell the difference between GX and XX1 other than the feel of the shifter, but the quickness of shifting is identical to me. So you save weight on this, but you could save a lot of money going with the GX Eagle. And they still come with great forks. It's the Fox Performance shocks instead of the factory Kashima coated stuff. Anyway, they spec their bikes extremely well. That being said, if this were my bike to keep, there are a couple things I would change. First off, I cannot stand how poor the engagement is on the DT hubs. Like, you get a lot of play in here before it actually grabs, and that's no fun on a technical climb when you're coming up to a rock and you need a half pedal and half ratchet, and you get all that slack before the chain even grabs. So I would upgrade the hub with a 54 tooth gear inside of there, and that gives it way more points of engagement. It's pretty similar to like an Industry 9 at that point. It does make it louder, and that tooth is a little bit weaker and more likely to break, so I get why people don't do it, but I would definitely do that for my riding style. So I'd change out the driver in the hub. That's about $100 and totally worth it in my opinion. I would personally change out the tires for my terrain. The Knobby Nicks aren't my favorite, but they are slidey and fun. When you come into a corner super hot, they predictably let go, and it's a lot of fun. I would also change the grips. I like these grips a lot for short rides, and they feel cool and they have a good grip, but my hands hurt after a while. I'd put some ESI extra chunkies on there. I would probably change the saddle. That's just my personal preference. And I've been running this with flat pedals, mainly because I ride flat pedals 99% of the time, and I wanted to compare this to all my other reviews. That being said, this bike I would probably put clipless pedals on it, and I usually don't ride clipless. Just the style of how this bike begs to be ridden really benefits from clipless pedals. I think the Rollick, its cousin with 27.5 wheels and a little more travel, a little more rowdy bike, that bike I put my flat pedals on. This bike wants to race, it wants to go as fast as possible, up, down, around corners, and clipless pedals just really add to that feel and that vibe. That's my best way to describe the differences between this and the Rollick. This wants to be clipped in, flying as fast as possible, crushing out as many miles as possible. Still fun, but the Rollick wants to be launching off every jump and drop and just goofing off as much as possible. Another note about the suspension. I tend to ride more aggressively, but I had to beef up the volume spacers in here. I had to go 2 sizes bigger because I was blowing through my travel when I was hitting jumps and stuff. If I were never hitting jumps and I was staying on the ground and just trying to track the ground as much as possible, I could have stuck with the stock settings, but I definitely ran a bigger one. So I'm running a 0.6 inch spacer in there. And I actually took out 2 of the volume spacers in the fork. The 140 mil factory 36, those come with 4 volume tokens in them, which was too much for me. I just couldn't use all my travel. So apart from that, the suspension setup is really simple. It is a little bit finicky. If you don't perfect this, the bike will either beat you up or blow through its travel a little more. So it's worth taking the time to get it dialed perfectly. Also, the Envy M60 rims are stiff. They're not overly stiff, but they are stiff. So if you have too much tire pressure, you're gonna get beat up like crazy. So I'm actually running pretty low tire pressure on this compared to how I would on other bikes. And it feels great and it doesn't ding the rims. Let's see. So Spot is a direct-to-consumer brand. They sell not in bike shops, they sell directly to you. You get onto their website and buy it from them. That's great because you save some money, but there's some disadvantages to that as well. Mainly, it's really hard to demo one because you can't just run down to your local dealer and hop on one and see which size is for you. So to combat that, Spot goes to a lot of events like Sedona Mountain Bike Festival. They're at Sea Otter, they're at the Outer Bikes, and they do demos out of their shop in Golden, Colorado. So if you're in Golden or near Golden in Denver area, you can go over there, take out a bike for the day, see which size you are, and get a feel for it. But I always recommend riding a bike before buying it if you can. As amazing as I think they are, they may not be for everyone, and it's a lot of coin to drop on a boutique company if you're not sure that it's going to suit your riding style or not. These frames are incredibly stiff. Also, I haven't weighed this bike, but this feels the lightest under my feet that I've ever ridden. I don't dabble in the cross-country race world, so I'm sure there are lighter bikes than this. Everything I ride has 120 mil travel and up, and I ride pretty aggressively and pretty hard, and I don't back off. I pretty much charge when I'm going downhill, and this bike, while being light, did not feel fragile or delicate. The rear end is extremely stiff. I love designs with a carbon triangle with no pivots in it. It just makes for a super stiff rear end, so when you're coming in and cornering, there's no flex in there. Spot uses O-rings on both sides of their bearings to keep gunk out, and I've had this in an extremely muddy condition. Unfortunately, we got caught in the rain and the mud did not cause any problems. It didn't pack up anywhere, didn't cause any squeaks or anything. And this bike is dead silent. It reminds me of my Santa Cruz bikes. You don't hear any rattles. The cable routing is fantastic. They've got little clamps everywhere. They run the external rear brake hose, which is really nice, and everything else is internal. Really nice attention to detail. Really cool carbon weave on this. They've knocked it out of the park. I really like the build of this bike. Yeah, so if you're coming from a road background, you're gonna love this bike. Road or cross-country XC racing, it feels light and it's quick and it just wants to get going down the trail. You can crush out huge miles on it without getting exhausted. And even if you don't have the world's most amazing bike handling skills, it still is gonna treat you well. It's a very balanced bike that you don't have to do any weird movements, or it doesn't take getting used to. You can hop right on it coming from a different bike and it just feels comfortable and at home. I've put a lot of novices on this when I was testing it, And it was amazing to watch their riding improve instantly from the weight and just how well balanced this is and how it handles. So you don't need to be a rock star rider to get the benefits out of this. That being said, if you are a rock star rider, you're really gonna love this bike, where you can just push it and it'll do exactly what you want it to. Now, if you come from the goof around, like Danny McCaskill style, or Jeff Kendall Weed style, or Nate Hill style riding, you're gonna notice the long chainstay, which I noticed. Right here, the distance from this axle to the center of your bottom bracket is 440 millimeters. Now, shortening it just 10 millimeters, 1 centimeter, sounds like such a minute change, but it completely changes how a bike feels. With these longer chainstays, they climb extremely well. In fact, I've never seen a bike that climbs better than this. This bike blows everything away. It climbs a lot like a Yeti, but even better, and then descends way better than a Yeti, in my opinion. With this long chainstay, it makes it really hard to hop into manuals and to bunny hop high. For short guys like me especially, the rear wheel's just a little bit further out there. And if you think of like drag motorcycles or hill climb dirt bikes, they extend the chainstays as much as possible to prevent it from wheeling. So the longer this gets, the harder it is to wheelie. That being said, this bike jumps extremely well when there's a jump to take off from, but when you're taking off from flat ground, it takes a bit of effort to lift. That being said, I still think it takes less effort than a high tower, or like a Yeti SB45 or a Yeti SB55. So for guys that play around, that like to manual, that come from a BMX background, that are just goofing off, it's doable and it's more playful than it should be for 440 millimeters, but that was my biggest downside to how it rode, was the longer rear end. If this had a 430 or even 425 rear end that was a little shorter, man, this would be my top bike ever. That being said, it's still one of my top 5 favorite bikes I've ever ridden. All right, here's the summary. How did this bike ride? All around, I will give this bike a 9.5 out of 10. It is an incredible bike. If you've never ridden a spot with the Living Link, there's really nothing like it. When you pedal it, you go a little bit farther than you were expecting. In fact, I was on a ride with a buddy and he had his e-bike and I had this, and we kept swapping back and forth. And maybe it's just because my brain thought I was still on an e-bike, but when I pedaled this one, it felt assisted. It's not, but just the suspension design is extremely efficient. And when you pedal, it just scoots you along. Now, that efficient design will be a drawback for some people. I know some people who live in really rooty, really rocky spots back east that don't care if their suspension bobs at all, because they want it just glued to the ground as much as possible. I've been able to dial the settings on the suspension so this is glued to the ground, but it's very efficient. It's not going to bob, and it's not going to sink into the terrain like a Horse Link bike would, or even a DW Link. So for some people, it won't quite have the traction you want. With a plus tire, it fixes all of those things. For me, I actually like the way it feels, and it's a little bit stiff on the up, but I actually really like that. I never touch the compression knob. I never lock it out. It's always open all the time, because I think that's how bikes should be. And a lot of my terrain is up and down, and if I have to reach down and keep switching things, it gets in the way of enjoying the bike ride. So overall, 9.5 out of 10. Climbing, 10 out of 10. I have never ridden a bike that climbs as well as this. I climb so much faster on this than any of my 650B bikes. A lot of that's due to the 29-inch wheels. A lot of it's due to how efficient it is and how light this bike is, but this bike is seriously fast. On corners, I'm going to give this a 9 out of 10. There are certain corners that this thing loves and certain corners that it kind of gets hung up on, like most 29ers. On swooping corners, or corners with a good approach that you can see, 10 out of 10. But when you're on really tight, just rocky, nasty stuff, and you're having to kind of thread the needle through nasty stuff at speed, it feels like a 29er, and there's no other way for me to say that. It can't quite turn on a dime like something with a shorter wheelbase and a shorter rear end. But most people don't find themselves in that situation, so I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10 on cornering. Descending, I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10. Fantastic descending bike. It uses all 130 mil of its travel, and it feels about like a 130 travel. You're not going to mistake it for a 150 bike, but it also doesn't feel like a cross-country race bike. On flow trails, this is a 10 out of 10. And really, this bike is built for 90% of the trails that we ride. We all want to think we're pretty cool and pretty bad and go ride the double black diamonds at the bike park. But for those of us who don't live in Whistler or Bellingham and ride that stuff daily, if we're honest with ourselves, most of our trails are blue square, maybe black diamonds. And that's where this bike really excels. You don't need more than 130, 140 mil travel for most trails. I've taken this on black diamonds and double black diamonds and gone super fast, and it handled way better than it should have for the travel numbers. But for really chunky stuff, I do prefer the Rollick, the 150, 160 mil 27.5 version of this bike. So descending's a 9 out of 10. Oh, sorry, we're talking about flow. Now, if we're talking flow trails, this thing gets a 10 out of 10. I think of like Flow Trail and Braille Trail in Santa Cruz. This would be the perfect bike for that, just because on berms, on jumps, on manicured trails that have great flow to them, this bike keeps its momentum unlike anything I've ridden. When it gets up to speed, it does not want to stop. And it's not scary, it just continues that momentum through stuff. Up little rises, down little rises. It just wants to keep on charging. And on flow trails, that is amazing. And that brings me to jumps. I don't normally like 29ers. I usually feel like the wheels are in the way and I'm just kind of fighting it, but not this bike. This bike just felt so neutral for me. Now I do buzz my butt when I'm manualing it, and I buzz my butt on really steep descents. I mean, my legs are so short, I can't even straddle the 29 tire. My legs are shorter than 29 inches tall, so it does get in the way a little bit, but it doesn't feel cumbersome or awkward or tippy or weird like a lot of 29ers I've ridden. And that comes down to jumps too. When I hit jumps on this thing, it feels perfect in the air. I normally like 26-inch wheels for dirt jumps and stuff, but man, this 29er just, it's just a complete package, and it does so well on jumps. I jump farther, higher, faster on this than I do on my Rollick, which totally blew me away. I did not expect that. So fun, I'm gonna give this 2 ratings on fun. If you come from the XC and the road biking and the triathlon side of things, this will be a 10 out of 10 for fun for you. If you come from the BMX side where you're manualing stuff and bunny hopping and just goofing around as much as possible, I'm gonna give it an 8 out of 10 for you. This bike is fun when it's glued to the ground and you're pumping everything and you're keeping that momentum and going as fast as possible. That's where the fun in this really comes out, and it's more fun than any other bike I've ridden in that realm, in that feeling of let's keep momentum, let's just flow through everything and just cruise and crush it. I've raced, but don't consider myself a racer anymore. I just like having fun on the trail, and the fun on this comes from the speed and the momentum. On my Rollick, the fun comes from, I wonder if I can get up that thing, or I wonder if I can drop off that ledge or hit this jump to that feature. And that sense of fun, this doesn't do quite as well because of that long chainstay, in my opinion. Like I said, if I had a 430 mil rear end on this, man, this thing would be my #1 bike. And I would still take it to the bike parks and the double black diamonds and just get beat up a little bit more, but it could definitely hack it. So for finally, hops and manuals, I'm going to give it a 6 out of 10. It just takes a lot of body English to get it off the ground and to hop high enough. I can manual it and bunny hop it okay, but not nearly as well as my Rollick or my Chameleon or other bikes of that nature. So if you're not the type, I mean, everyone hops on the trail and you see a little rock or a little root and you spring off it, and it's great for that. But I'm talking like hopping up a 3-foot rock and trying to land on top, it's going to struggle with that, whereas the Rollick won't. Now let's compare this to a couple other 29ers I've ridden that I liked. I really like the Evil Following MB on the downs. It's a 120 mil bike. It doesn't feel like a 29er when you're riding it, and neither does this. The MB I prefer on the downhill a little bit more than this. It's a little bit shorter rear end, a little more aggressive on the downs, and it feels more like a 140 bike. But on the climbs, I hated the Following. It was so heavy feeling, first of all, and it didn't keep its momentum very well, and it bobbed like crazy. So I'd much rather have the Mayhem than that. If it was downhill only, I would pick the Evil. Another bike that most people have ridden and know about is a Santa Cruz Hightower. And on paper, these have a lot of the similar numbers, but this bike is way more fun to ride for me. I've never gotten along with the Hightower, whether it's in the Plus or whether it's in the 29er. And I like Santa Cruz and VPP bikes, but that bike is super hard to manual. It's super hard to hop around on. It just feels too long and it just doesn't quite feel right to me. This bike feels way more balanced. Another 29er I really like is the Pivot Switchblade. Love that bike. This bike climbs better. The Pivot Switchblade is slightly more playful on the downs and a little bit more hard hitting than this even. I also like the Rocky Mountain Instinct, which is a cool bike. This climbs way better. The Instinct's more playful, easier to lift that front wheel and pop off of stuff. But as a bike for getting the job done as quickly as possible, I prefer this as well. Compared to an Ibis Ripley, this bike is way more capable of hitting the hard stuff. They both have that sprightly feel when you get on the gas and go. They both feel great. I still think this is more efficient, a little peppier, a little more fun on the climbs, and way more fun on the descents. Just a little bit more overall fun bike. There's nothing that the Ripley does that I like more than the way that this bike does it. So finally, let's talk about this compared to the bike that's the closest to it, the other Spot, the Spot Rollick. So the Spot Mayhem 509 is a 130, 140, 29er or plus bike. Its cousin, my main bike, the Spot Rollick, is a 150, 160, 27.5 bike. A little bit slacker, shorter chain stays. It's my dream bike. It's my favorite bike. That being said, if this had the short chain stays of that other bike, that would be, if you could combine the two, that'd be my perfect bike. Both bikes can be ridden on any kind of trail. The Rollick is still super fun at slow stuff, and it feels a lot like a 50-10 until the trail gets bigger, then it feels like a Nomad. It's pretty amazing. I've got a review to that up in the right if you want to watch the Rollick review. The Rollick and the Mayhem they overlap more than they don't. You can ride both of them on any trail. But let's talk about some of the famous trails across the nation and which one I would pick. So if you're in Northern California, excluding Lake Tahoe and the Sierras, I would pick the Mayhem 509. There's just not enough gnarly chunk there, and most of the trails there are pretty flowy. This is the perfect bike for that. Downeyville, California, I'm probably going to pick the Mayhem 509. There's nothing really huge on that trail to warrant more suspension, and this bike will just cruise on that. It would be such a blast. For Tahoe, I would go with the Rollick 607. It's just can handle those bigger hits better. It's easier to maneuver on really tough obstacles. Oregon, this would be my bike, the Mayhem 509. Washington, half of Washington would be the Mayhem 509, but stuff like Tiger Mountain, I would definitely want the Rollick on that. This could handle it, but the Rollick's going to soak up those big hits better, and it will keep its momentum better due to the suspension absorbing the stuff rather than relying on the bike's momentum to keep through there. So Tiger Mountain, definitely the Rollick. Like Doothy Hill, just goofing around practicing bike skills, definitely the Rollick because it wheelies better, it manuals better, it bunny hops better. They both pump extremely well. When you pump a downside of something, they don't squish and they accelerate forward, but the Rollick would win there. Squamish, Rollick. Whistler, Rollick. Let's see, something like the BC bike race, I would go with the Mayhem 509. 40-mile days, 50-mile days, I would not rather have any bike other than this. This bike is perfect for that stuff. Arizona, it's gonna be a tough one. I'd probably pick the Mayhem with the plus tires. There's so many square rocks there. It's like running over bricks that you can lower your air pressure, so when you hit the corner of the brick, the tire eats it instead of the suspension, and you can keep your momentum going. I really like plus tires in the Southwest. You get the sand, you get the gravel, the loose stuff. And to me, plus tires aren't so much about the traction as they are about taking the edge off of square edge hits to keep your momentum going. With the plus tires, this bike feels a little bit slower. It loses some of that I want to get where I'm going as fast as possible feel, and gains more of a bruiser attitude of I'm just gonna goof around and plow into stuff and just go for it. Both have their pros and cons depending on how you ride. Utah in Moab for stuff like Navajo Rocks, Klondike Bluffs, Bar M, Clonzo, that sort of thing, I'd pick the Mayhem 509. For stuff like Whole Enchilada, Captain Ahab, Portal, I would pick the Rollick. Just has more bump eating capability. Colorado, most stuff I would rather have the Mayhem 509. Like Crested Butte, I'd rather be on this bike for everything except for Evolution Bike Park and like Dr. Park. Dr. Park, awesome trail, but it's got lots of features you need to have tight negotiations around, and the Rollick is better at threading the needle tightly. They both climb extremely well. The Rollick maybe climbs 90% as well as this. It's efficient, but it just doesn't have that momentum that the Mayhem has. Let's see, let's keep going east. Pisgah, DuPont, out there. If you're not hitting drops bigger than 4 feet, I would go with the Mayhem 509. If you're hitting every booter you can, or you're hitting really big chunk, go with the Mayhem. It's gonna be better suited for that. It'd be really interesting to see like a long travel version of this. That would be quite the bike. It'd be pretty incredible. Who knows what we'll see one day from them, but that would be really neat. For like Florida and stuff where you're not doing a lot of elevation, but there are, I know you guys have some great riding out there with plenty of aerobic exercise. The Mayhem 509 is the one that I would pick. And up in the Northeast, Vermont, Maine, that area, my buddy Phil and you guys up there, that's tough to say. If you're in the bike park all day, pick the Rollick. For most trails, I would go with the Mayhem 509. I know you guys have a lot of rocks and roots and stuff out east. Both bikes handle it extremely well. I like plus tires a little better for rocks and roots. I think it just motors through a little bit better and keeps its momentum, but that's up to you. Thanks for bearing with me. I hope this has been useful information to you. It's been really fun to compare this to other bikes and compare it to the Rollick as well. If you have questions, post them in the comments below. This bike is amazing. It just wants to sprint everywhere it's going, up and down. I'm faster on it than any other bike that I've ridden, and it gains its fun from the speed that it gets everywhere. And it loses a little bit of fun in manuals, bunny hops, goofing off, because it wants to just kind of cruise all the time. That's not to say it's a twitchy bike. It's not. It's very stable. It's very planted, but it wants to just cruise. And if you care about that, if you're a competitive guy who wants to beat your Strava times, if you just like riding as fast as you can, if you like beating all your buddies, you gotta give one of these a try. I'm not affiliated with Spot. I don't gain anything from doing this review. I just hope it helps you. Spot sent me the bike because they know I have a Rollick and they know I love it, and they wanted me to compare it and make this video for you. So I got to use it for a month. Thank you, Spot. It's been super fun. I do not want to give this bike back. This is a really tough bike to give back. Thanks for watching. Get dusty.
Yeah! Ha ha ha.